I got out of graduate school and I got a job in a manufacturing plant and learned from the bottom up all the little details of industrial engineering, manufacturing engineering, production inventory control, keeping track of the details, and also how to supervise and change people around. Not as easy as you might think, to make sure you got the right things done at the right time and didn't waste too much time. I got promoted to the engineering department, and there I became in charge of all the data that came out of the product development center, amongst other tasks, of course. And the the drawing, everything was paper. Everything's on paper. I got the job of quoting, since I knew the details of everything. I could find costs and I could like calculate and all that kind of stuff. So I would come home. A lot of times I would work at home and I'd have a great big roll of drawings, and I'd take the assembly into sub-assemblies, or the sub-assemblies of the sub-assemblies, lay them out on the living room floor with a 4-column accounting ledger, and I would do takeoffs of the bill of materials and then find the cost, do all the multiplication and adding and everything, come up with material cost, and try to swag in you know off-all and stuff like that from the aluminum that would be used to manufacture or whatever, and would work on that. And that was a big part of my job. And quoting was painstaking, time-consuming. Went through a lot of pencil lead and cranked out my little calculator like crazy, and hopefully came out with something where if we got the job we made money. And these were fairly sizable projects. One, we built truck bodies for UPS for a while. We built truck bodies for the U.S. Post Office. Another job that was really interesting, I went to Westinghouse, got a whole big sheaf of drawings, and I quoted the building the bodies of the first people movers at the Atlanta airport. Shows you the age. It was in the 1970s. Everything was done on paper. Data was collected tediously. It was error prone. There were a few double checks. I had to be painstakingly careful as I wrote everything down, just like the engineers as they designed everything on the paper that went along with it. This is Gary. This is podcast number 202, Industrial Challenges for 2020. And in my long-running series of podcasts on automation and control and data. This podcast is brought to you with support from Inductive Automation. Discover a whole new view with Ignition 8 by Inductive Automation. Packed with features for the modern control system like unlimited licensing, high-powered tags, and a mobile-first, flexible design environment for all devices, Ignition 8 supports enterprises of any size. See all that Ignition has to offer at inductiveautomation.com. And I thank them very much for their several years of sponsoring me once I went out on my own to do this kind of work. In a product center, initially when the VP came in and says, hey, I want to take you over to the product center, work for me, and he called me data administrator. And data were those large, flat, does anybody remember those? Large, flat file cabinets about an inch or so deep that the drawings were all stored flat. When we hired a new design draftsman, he'd come in, I'd give him the task. His first task was to assemble his standing table drawing board before he could go to work. And the company I was at, for the most part, he would, they'd start out, and I think it was always a he back in the 70s. But anyway, he'd ask, like, what are tolerances? I say, for what you're doing right here, plus or minus half an inch is probably really good. But anyway, that's aside from the fact that everything was done on that way. We did takeoffs and bills of material. That was all printed out on 8.5 by 11 sheets. Specifications for all the components were once again on another form that had been developed by somebody before me, and those were all filed away. I had a secretary who was really, really good in many respects, but she had a little trouble filing in numerical order, which is bad when every specification is a number. So that was always an interesting challenge. But that's the way data was back then. Matter of fact, we distributed data to production and to cost accounting in notebooks. and I got a new boss at some point in time. In fact, I had several of them, as we were part of a division or a Fortune 50 company, and they would send people in and they started churning management until they churned me out. But anyway, one guy had worked at Ford in product development, and he taught me the Ford Motor Company system of notebooks and sub notebooks. And he said at Ford they had a guy whose job was book bearer, and when they had a big meeting, the vice president or the head of whatever product group that was meeting with Henry Ford II. Anyway, they'd give Henry Ford a small notebook, and the VP would have a larger notebook, and for every tab section there would be at least one big thick notebook, and there were so many of those, that's why they needed a book bearer to take all the books to the conference room for the meetings. And we were doing about the same thing where I worked at the time. Let's fast forward to like today. And all those drawings, they're all developed on a computer in digital format. It's all stored digitally. Things are checked, and interferences and all that sort of stuff are all done automatically. The specifications and the parts and the part numbers are all stored as they design it and they develop it and they put it in. That's all gets stored digitally. It's and if you want to know any of that data, all you have to do is go to a computing device, assuming you have access, and you can go to it and you can find the specification of this part, or how these parts are joined together, or if you're in a batch process, the whole instructions for doing the batch, which ingredient goes in and how it's mixed and how the temperature is and all that stuff is all done digitally. Everything is digital, and if you want to retrieve it, it's much easier to retrieve and just pull it out. The quoting I used to do when I'd unroll those scads of drawings and try to do takeoffs and see how everything interrelated and all that kind of stuff, a week's worth of work now is like an hour's worth of work, and it's done much better. There are fewer errors. Yeah, I probably made errors, I don't know, but anyway, we've progressed in 40 years. We've gone a long way, just tremendously, but it's still the same thing. We still have data that describes a process or a product, or routings or all that sort of thing, and it used to all be done hand drawn and hand typed and all that kind of stuff. And now it's just all in digital, and we can retrieve it, we can get it however we want, we can turn it into graphics, we can turn it into pretty pictures and all that kind of thing. So it's different because we have all these new different technologies. We don't have notebooks, we have folders on a desktop, and the desktop is a virtual desktop, and not this desktop that I'm kind of looking at underneath my camera right there. It's the same, and it's different, and it's better, and it goes faster, and there's fewer errors, and it's really good. And then we just have all these letterings and all these other things like Industry 4.0 and Internet of Things, and it's all the same kind of digital stuff, which makes things much better. We get information to the right people faster, easier. We get it to where it needs to go. We can update it faster, better. We can get instant access back. The Internet of Things is simply a way to get data. When I needed data back in my old days back in that company, I got in my car, drove from the product center to one of the manufacturing plants, and I went on a production line or wherever I needed to go, and I did the measurements, however it needed to be measured. And now, we have a sensor. The sensor measures it, and I could sit in the office and I could get a display that shows like the whole plant and the parts moving through the whole plant or whatever it is I'm looking at. Same thing, except it's better, faster, less error prone. It goes faster, and I can distribute it much more widely. Working with purchasing and procurement on getting parts, part of the supply chain going into the plant, was very difficult. Send it by snail mail, and you had to wait a long time, and then there'd be a confusion, or they would change something about that part, and we'd have to change part number, and we had to change maybe a drawing and that sort of thing, and it was all time consuming. We're doing the same thing, but we're doing it much better now. So that's kind of where we are. We're kind of like very similar to what we were doing, but very much different at the same time. But it's just different in a matter of utilizing technology much more intelligently, leveraging every new step that comes along. And we may call it, marketing people may come up with fancy names, and that's all well and good. That's fine. I like marketing, but it's not like we've reinvented a wheel. We're doing the wheel much better. So I was thinking about this whole thing, and I thought, well, what's the next step? What's the real problem going on there? And that problem is that we don't know how to manage all that stuff that we're doing. How do we organize engineering, production, reliability, maintenance, finance and accounting, plant management, supply chain management, and all the other managements? How do we get them all organized around how to do the job better? How do you use that data? How do you get that data? Where's the source? Where do you go to it? When you're starting a new project, how do you organize that project? How do you initiate it? Who do you pick to lead it? What do they need to do? What resources will they need to do the job? That's all management and leadership jobs. And where we seem to be lacking, I just got another report I got a thing from a PR person, and they want me to interview somebody, which is the normal thing, but it's kind of the same thing. It's like, management, we have discovered, does not use Internet of Things well because they're afraid to spend the money, or they don't realize if they spend the money. And basically this last one they just sent in, I said, why don't you stop calling it artificial intelligence and IoT and using buzzwords, and why don't you just say, we can help you get data, see data, and manage from it better, which is kind of the sense. That's where this company would help their customer do their job better. But it still takes leadership, and I think that's the challenge we have going forward, is that we need to do all this organizing stuff. We need the vision to put together the stuff, and without all these buzzwords, don't go in. If you're a supplier listening to this, don't go in and say, hey, we do AI and ML and IoT and I4 and just watch the guy's eyes glaze over. Maybe she would like somebody to come in and say, we can help you. What's your problem? Oh, okay, you can't get visibility into the supply chain. Well, we could do this and this and this. It would take some data, so you have to put a project together, and somebody would have to fill this out and get this data, and that's how you would do it. And that sort of thing. And don't use any of the buzzwords, because most of us in technology who move from technology into some kind of sales and management role learn to kind of ditch the techie words and talk in terms of benefits. And how do we do this? And how do we break down those silos? We don't say we'll break down the silos. We'll say, how do you get people working together on a team so that they can all get the data and get access to it, and that sort of thing. That's our challenge. That's where we're going. That's where 2020 is going to take us. And I'm looking forward to it, because I see, despite all these things I get where they'll say, hey, we just discovered management doesn't know how to do this. They just haven't talked to the right management. There are people doing it, and they're doing it well. And I expect to see more people doing it. And that's the challenge for 2020. I'm sitting here at the end of January, actually on my wife's birthday, and recording this. And we'll see what we're talking about when December rolls around, if we don't have a much bigger uptake on getting some of this digital ecosystem moving along for the benefit of manufacturing. Just a reminder, this podcast is brought to you with support from Inductive Automation. Discover a whole new view with Ignition 8 by Inductive Automation, packed with features for the modern control system, like unlimited licensing, high-powered tags, and a mobile-first flexible design environment for all devices. Ignition 8 supports enterprises of any size. See all Ignition has to offer at inductiveautomation.com. This is Gary Minchell, signing out from another Gary on Automation or Gary on Manufacturing podcast. Thank you.